Today at 6, all 12 to 15-year-olds in the UK are likely to get offered the Pfizer coronavirus vaccine. The UK's chief medical officers hope the move will keep more children in school, cutting the risk to their mental health.
It is an important and potentially useful additional tool to help reduce the public health impacts that come through educational disruption.
It's now up to ministers in the Home Four Nations to decide if the vaccinations go ahead. Also on the programme. Nearly a third of all those arriving in England and Northern Ireland in the spring may have broken quarantine rules. Climate protesters caused chaos on the M25, blocking slip roads, leading to enormous tailbacks.
Were your nerves out of control or were you calm?
And the global appeal of a new sporting icon, Emma Raducanu, with the world at her feet. Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. All 12 to 15-year-olds in the UK are set to be offered a dose of the Pfizer coronavirus vaccine. The UK's 4 chief medical officers say the move takes into account the impact of the pandemic on children's education, as well as the risk to their mental health of missing school. Earlier this month, the body advising the government said it couldn't recommend vaccinating healthy 12 to 15-year-olds on health grounds alone. 3 million children could now be eligible for the jab. Here's our medical editor, Fergus Walsh.
So I'm looking for 4 right-angled triangles.
There's a new formula for vaccination. 10 days ago, the scientists on the JCVI Advisory Committee said there were only marginal health benefits from immunising all 12 to 15-year-olds. Now the UK's 4 top doctors have concluded the wider benefits for education and mental health make giving a single dose the right answer. England's chief medical officer, Chris Whitty, a pivotal figure in the pandemic, said vaccination would help prevent disruption to learning.
We do not think that this is a panacea. This is not a silver bullet. It's not a single thing that on its own will do so, but we think it is an important and potentially useful additional tool to help reduce the public health impacts that come through educational disruptions.
Isn't there a danger that many parents and indeed children are going to be left confused after the JCVI didn't recommend vaccines for this age group, and now you are?
In medicine, you have to take factors into account, some of which are very direct and some of which are broader, and that's a pretty standard way of approaching risk and benefit. So we would see this as not in conflict.
If you measure that angle there...
Like schools across the UK, St Margaret's Academy in Liverpool has faced huge disruption over the pandemic. At some points, more than half its 1,000 pupils have been self-isolating rather than in class, so they support today's decision.
It's been very, very difficult. The sooner we can get back to the routine of everybody coming into school without the disruption caused by the virus, the better. And this is a major step in helping us do that.
The decision on vaccinating 3 million 12 to 15-year-olds is a balance of risks versus benefits. There's thought to be a risk of between 3 and 17 cases of myocarditis, inflammation of the heart muscle, for every million receiving a single dose of the Pfizer vaccine. The symptoms, which can also be triggered by COVID, include chest pain, shortness of breath and palpitations, but these are mostly mild and short-lived. As for COVID, healthy children are at extremely low risk of serious illness. Only 2 in a million end up in intensive care after infection. After so much toing and froing on this issue, what do parents make of it?
Got a daughter who's nearly 14, so we have no problem with her getting her vaccinated.
I'm not sure. I really don't know. I don't know. At the moment, I'll probably say no.
So it's a contentious issue, but I think it should be compulsory to have vaccinations across all age groups.
Like healthy 16 to 17-year-olds, the 12 to 15s will be offered only a single dose of vaccine at this stage. Government scientists think this will be enough to significantly reduce outbreaks in schools and get education back on track.
So, Fergus, to be clear, who is it who will decide whether or not a child gets this? Is it the parent or the child?
Well, parents will definitely be asked for their consent, and the 4 chief medical officers say they expect there to be a conversation now at home between parents and their children. But to be clear, Clive, where a child is considered competent to make a decision about their health, they, not their parents, will have the final say. Now, the jabs will be given in schools in the coming weeks. Chris Whitty said he's not saying to parents, you must get your 12 to 15-year-olds immunised. But he said if you add in the small health benefits, plus the educational advantages and those to mental health, he says you should definitely go for it.
And it's just one dose.
Yes, just one dose. And this really sums up just how balanced this decision has been, because the risks from myocarditis, this inflammation of the heart, are more common after the second dose. And so that probably tipped the balance against having 2 doses at this stage. Now, France, the US, Italy, Spain, they all went with 2 doses. And of course, they all went with it during the summer holidays. And that opportunity has been missed here. But just remember, finally, there are 6 million adults who are yet to have a single dose of COVID vaccine. And they're the ones who would benefit most by getting their jab right now.
OK. Fergus, thank you. Fergus Wash there. There's also a warning from England's Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty, about the pressures that COVID will bring the NHS this winter. He says the virus isn't just something from the past. Tomorrow, Boris Johnson is expected to unveil his government's plans for dealing with infections over the coming months, with the NHS already under pressure due to higher levels of hospital admissions across the UK. Here's our health editor, Hugh Pym.
A health system already under strain. That's the reality in many areas ahead of the government's winter plan for England to be announced tomorrow. NHS leaders in Nottinghamshire have asked local people to only come to A&E if there are urgent, life-threatening emergencies.
We've just got busier, as lockdowns have eased, people have come in with very sick people with COVID and other things, but also we're seeing a rise in people coming with simpler things, and we really encourage people not to come unless they really have to.
Hayley, who's pregnant, hasn't yet been vaccinated. She's now in hospital with COVID.
I knew it was COVID straight away because I felt like fog over my chest. I was struggling with my breathing, and being pregnant, you already, you've got extra problems anyway as it is.
Daily COVID hospital admissions in the UK fell back in the spring, but then started picking up again in July, following an increase in cases. After coming back a bit, the increase continued through August and into this month. And at times recently, there have been more than 1,000 hospital admissions a day.
And what does that screen say now?
3.10.
The Prime Minister today, visiting a British gas training academy, will set out a plan for managing COVID, and he wasn't totally ruling out reimposing some restrictions if there was another virus surge.
We've got to do everything that's right to protect the country, but the way things are going at the moment, we're very confident in the steps that we've taken. I'll be setting out a lot more tomorrow.
We have seen a levelling off.
Experts point out there was hardly any flu to deal with last winter. This time it'll be different.
Of course, with complications such as flu, other types of viruses and winter illnesses that start to build up, we are going to see much added pressure on the healthcare service that we haven't yet dealt with when there has been this number of COVID cases.
Nicola Sturgeon has said she can't remember a time when Scotland's hospitals have been busier. The Scottish Government's announced that, unlike England, vaccine passports will be adopted at some venues. The Welsh Government will decide on that soon. There are no plans to do so in Northern Ireland. For all the UK's governments, there's huge uncertainty over just what the winter will bring. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Well, the government's latest coronavirus figures show there were 30,825 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, which means an average of over 34,521 new cases per day in the last week. There were more than 8,200 people in hospital with the virus as of Friday. 61 deaths were reported in the latest 24-hour period. That's of people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test. And that's an average of 141 deaths per day in the last week. Just over 89% of people aged 16 or over have had their first jab, and 81% have been double vaccinated. Let's get more from our political editor, Laura Koonsberg, who's at Westminster. Laura, the latest figures show rising hospital admissions, so there's a lot riding on the Prime Minister's announcement of his winter plans for tomorrow.
Well, there really is, Clive. I mean, through the summer we all got used, didn't we, to restrictions disappearing from our lives, things feeling a bit more free and easy, kids going back to school, a lot of people gradually getting back to work and life being a bit more like normal. But with such pressure on the health services we've just been hearing for Hugh, essentially what the Prime Minister is going to do tomorrow is set out his insurance policy for England, not bringing back restrictions, not doing anything like bringing back something that might look like severe limits on all of our lives, but spelling out what could make a comeback if COVID really takes hold again. And that could be the reintroduction of compulsory face masks. It could mean things like encouraging people to stay at home again instead of going to work. It could still, even though the government doesn't want to do this and has said they won't for now, mean bringing in vaccine passports in England. So if you like, what he's trying to do is say these are the kinds of things that the government could press the button on if we end up in the same kind of terrible situation that we've been before. Now, it's very, very important, though, to say that, to remember that the vaccine has changed the situation profoundly. But there is no question that there is very obviously a lot of pressure on the health service already, only very near the beginning of September. The other thing that we do know is coming tomorrow, and we expect there to be an announcement for all 4 nations in the UK, is the booster programme of a jab probably coming 6 months after the first inoculation for over 50s. But the final details of that won't emerge until tomorrow. Clive.
Okay. Laura, thank you. Laura Koonsberg there at Westminster. Nearly a third of people arriving in England and Northern Ireland between March and May could have broken quarantine rules. Research by the BBC has found that more than 300,000 cases were passed to investigators during the period. The government hasn't been able to confirm how many of these were found to have broken the rules or couldn't be traced, but insists it has some of the toughest border controls in the world. Here's our political correspondent, Alex Forsyth.
Think back to spring this year. Getting on a plane was only allowed if it was essential. Rules meant to limit the spread of COVID variants. If you did travel from certain countries on a red list, you had to quarantine in a hotel when you landed. Most other travellers had to isolate at home for 10 days. Like Henrik, he arrived back in England in April after visiting family in Poland. He received one call to check he was self-isolating, but he says not much else.
Well, it wasn't effective at all because it didn't track and trace me at all. Like I said, I could have gone out to the supermarket had I so desired. There was no contact with anybody at all.
Between mid-March and the end of May this year, just over 1 million people arrived in England and Northern Ireland who had to self-isolate for 10 days by law. Scotland and Wales had separate systems. During this period, more than 6 million calls were made to check people were complying. But in more than 300,000 cases, around 3 in 10, there were doubts that rules were being followed, so they were referred for further checks.
People were referred if, for example, they didn't cooperate with check calls or repeatedly failed to answer. Then they might have had a visit from police or from a private firm employed by the Home Office to ramp up these checks. The government says most people were found to be self-isolating, but it hasn't provided a figure or said how many people couldn't be traced at all.
In a statement, the government said, the Home Office looks to visit all individuals referred to us by NHS Test and Trace who are required to isolate at home following international travel. We visit over 99% of the cases referred to this service. Long-standing critics of the government's border policy say it demonstrates weaknesses in the system during the period the Delta variant took hold in the UK.
This shows that the problems with the home quarantine system and also the failure to put India on the red list early enough together made it much easier for the Delta variant to spread before the vaccines were fully rolled out. That's what led us then to the third wave and the big delays in being able to lift lockdown restrictions.
International travel is building up again. And with the virus still circulating around the globe, there will be questions about the government's approach, not least if another variant takes off. Alex Forsyth, BBC News.
A court in New York is about to hear the next stage of a civil case being brought against Prince Andrew over allegations of sexual assault, claims he denies. Our North America correspondent Neda Taufik is in New York. Neda, what are we expecting?
Yeah, well, Clive, this is the first hearing of Virginia Giuffre's case in which she accuses Prince Andrew of sexually assaulting her in New York, London, and the U.S. Virgin Islands when she was just 17 years old. Now, the Duke of York denies all of the allegations. Already, though, these proceedings are proving to be complex. The court was just notified today that Prince Andrew has chosen a lawyer to appear on his behalf. We expect him, per a letter to the court, to contest the jurisdiction of the U.S. court in this matter and to argue that the papers were not properly served. Now, on the other hand, Virginia Giuffre's lawyers have accused Prince Andrew of instructing his representatives to evade service of that complaint. They claim that they served a Metropolitan Police officer at the main gates of his Windsor Park, a great home, in late August. They've also submitted evidence to the court showing that they sent emails to Prince Andrew's Royal Household Office email and sent a letter to one of his homes by first-class post. But ultimately, Clive, it will be up to the judge here to decide if those papers were properly served and if this case can get underway.
OK, Neda, thank you for that. Neda Taufik there in New York. It is 16 minutes past 6, our top story this evening. And all 12 to 15-year-olds in the UK are set to be offered a first dose of the Pfizer coronavirus vaccine. And the message in Mandarin, how Emma Raducanu is being tipped as a global superstar after her US Open win.
And coming up on Sports Day on the BBC News channel, the fallout continues from Sunday's crash in Formula One as Lewis Hamilton thanks the Halo safety device for saving his life at the Italian Grand Prix.
In November, crucial talks on climate change will take place in Glasgow as the world comes together to discuss making the transition from fossil fuels to a zero-carbon economy. Now, that will involve new jobs in green industries. In the UK, there are currently 410,000, with the government hoping for 2 million by 2030. But trade unions say many more could be created much more quickly, and they're warning that Britain could lose out to other countries. So, what are green jobs and what do they entail? Here's our science editor, David Shukman.
There are jobs that hardly existed a generation ago. Bridie is learning to maintain wind turbines, Paul makes heat pumps to replace gas boilers, and Beth is at work on a futuristic farm. All three are zero carbon to help with climate change.
I think for my generation it's a huge deal. Like, it's affecting us now. You're starting to see the problems that the climate change is causing now, and with the ice caps melting and the world heating and all of these deadlines being set by the government of things have to happen now.
In the purple light of her vertical farm, Beth explains how the water's recycled, the crops are sold locally, and the power is solar from panels on the roof in this industrial estate in Scunthorpe.
This is the future. If you can grow stuff that's supposed to grow in Italy and here in the UK, you can grow it anywhere in the world. You can grow it in the Middle East, in Africa, and then you cut out all of the transportation. So you're saving money, time, resources.
And carbon, I reckon.
And carbon, a lot of carbon. You're not flying basil all over the world.
Paul McGugan reckons he's also in an industry of the future. The heat pumps being made here in Livingston release no carbon. And for him, a green career is safe.
Me and my girlfriend, we've just bought a new home, and the next step for us is hopefully to start a family. So knowing that we are doing our bit in this company to create a better, brighter future, a more sustainable future for my family and for generations to come is a big deal to me.
So now we're just checking to see if there's any power coming in.
As an apprentice, Bridie is getting ready to join the offshore wind industry. From Grimsby, she'll head out to the North Sea, to the giant turbines there, rather than to the fishing grounds that once made her hometown famous.
It's really nice to see that growing from fishing to engineering and from kind of an old industry to a renewable green one. That's definitely, taking the future by charge.
What for you is the attraction of working out at sea on these immense wind turbines?
I mean, the North Sea, I don't think many people romanticise the North Sea, but on a quiet day when the sun is rising, I think one could certainly do that. So I can't wait, it'll be great.
So there are new green opportunities, and they're essential for the UK to go zero carbon. And we'll soon see if enough are being created to make that a reality. David Shuckman, BBC News.
And 60 people have been arrested after climate protesters blocked several slip roads onto the M25 during the morning rush hour, causing huge delays. The pressure group Insulate Britain is demanding the government steps up efforts to insulate homes to help combat global warming. Here's our chief environment correspondent, Justin Rowlatt.
Just after 8 a.m, a small group of protesters ran onto a slip road onto the M25, obstructing traffic. There were similar blockades at 4 other junctions. The action caused long tailbacks on Britain's busiest motorway. At one point, the protesters from a group called Insulate Britain sat down on the motorway itself. They claim the action was justified because it draws attention to what they say is the urgent need for the government to improve insulation in UK homes to reduce carbon emissions.
That's what gives us the right, is when our government is not doing its job properly, and that's what we're asking Boris to do, is to get on with the job and insulate Britain.
One motorist tried to take matters into his own hands before thinking better of it. Others were more reflective.
It's not the right way to do it, but
they've got the right to do it.
In this country, we've got the right to do, with freedom of speech and all that lot, they've got the right to do it.
Ridiculous. There's a lot of rubbish myself, really. There's other ways of doing it.
The government says it is headed in the right direction, with plans to spend £1.3 billion on energy efficiency measures this year. But the Climate Change Committee, its own advisors on climate matters, says it needs to find between £3 and £4 billion every year to help households to meet its own targets on cutting emissions. Justin Rowlatt, BBC News.
Let's take a look at some of the day's other top stories now. And a barrister representing victims and survivors of the Grenfell Tower disaster has told the public inquiry that incompetence and a total neglect of safety were at the heart of the tragedy, which claimed 72 lives in 2017. Stephanie Barwise QC, in closing statements of the second phase of the inquiry, blamed what she called an inept design team for allowing the building to be refurbished with dangerous materials. She said the contractors, Ryden, had secretly pocketed over £300,000 by using cheaper flammable cladding, and that a lack of candour by the cladding and insulation manufacturers, Arconic, Kingspan and Celotex, about the safety of their products amounted to an affront to the dead. A police investigation is continuing into the fire. Britney Spears has announced on Instagram her engagement to her long-term boyfriend Sam Asghari. Last week, her father Jamie Spears filed papers in a court in Los Angeles to end the 13-year conservatorship he's held for her, which the singer said prevented her from marrying again or even having more children. And Andrew Neil has resigned as the chairman and lead presenter of GB News. The journalist and former BBC presenter was on air for 2 weeks following the launch of the channel in June before taking a break. He's expected to continue as a guest commentator. Now, in the largest clinical trial of its kind, the new blood test that can detect more than 50 types of cancer before symptoms appear is beginning in parts of England. The aim is to recruit 140,000 volunteers, rising to 1 million in 2024 for what's being described as a revolutionary new way to treat cancer. Our health correspondent Dominic Hughes has all the details.
Has a doctor ever told you that you have cancer?
No.
In a retail park in Runcorn in Cheshire, one of the world's largest clinical trials is getting underway. The first of thousands of volunteers are giving blood samples to be tested for the presence of tiny traces of DNA linked to tumours, a warning of future disease. volunteers like Stuart, a serving fire brigade officer.
It seems a good opportunity to actually become involved with something. Sadly, most of us are touched by cancer at some time in our lives, and thought, well, actually, early detection is one thing that is going to help in our armoury against that.
Detecting and treating cancer early is the key to a successful recovery. But some cancers, like those of the head and neck or the pancreas, are hard to spot in the early stages. This blood test could help and avoid invasive procedures like biopsies.
There's a lot of potential here, that it could detect not only a range of different cancers, but potentially some of them at an earlier stage. But it's crucial that we actually do now test the research on the test on a much bigger scale in this research trial and work out whether it can detect cancer earlier.
For years, scientists have been trying to develop a simple blood test that could detect cancers before any symptoms became obvious. But they really struggled because the tests just weren't accurate enough. There were either too many false positives or false negatives. Now, though, they think they have made a real breakthrough.
So technology is really what's made the difference here. First of all, we need to be able to detect really minute quantities of DNA in our blood. And our ability to do that has improved markedly over the last several years. The second thing is the power of modern computing, really. So we've looked at data from tens of thousands of people, and we've used that data to really optimize the test.
This is just the start of a clinical trial, but if the promise of this simple test is fulfilled, it could mark the beginning of a revolution in cancer treatment. Dominic Hughes, BBC News, Runcorn.
It seems the sky's the limit for the British tennis star Emma Raducanu. At just 18, her sensational US Open victory at the weekend makes her one of the hottest properties in sport. Some believe she could earn more than £100 million in sponsorship deals alone. Here's our sports editor, Dan Rowan.
18-year-old champion Emma Raducanu joins us live in Times Square this morning.
This is Good Morning America. Having conquered the US Open, Britain's newest sporting superstar proving a hit on American TV earlier, the biggest networks queuing up to speak to the teenage tennis sensation.
If you just do the best you can with every single day, time flies and you can really achieve anything with inner belief.
Raducanu's been thrown into the spotlight in a way no one predicted after producing one of sport's greatest ever fairy tales. But today, a British Grand Slam winner from a different era warned that the youngster's newfound fame would need to be carefully managed.
She has the potential to be a world number one and a multiple Grand Slam champion. We've got to give her time to develop. And if it doesn't happen within the next 12 months, it probably will happen in the 12 months after that. And we've got to protect her because her world, it's going to hit her like a sledgehammer. I don't think she realises what's coming her way.
Having sprung from relative obscurity just a few weeks ago, Raducanu's now one of the world's most marketable athletes.
大家好，我想说谢谢。
The teenager, whose mother is Chinese, thanking fans in fluent Mandarin, the latest sign of her global appeal.
I think quite quickly her sponsorship earnings off the court will dwarf her prize money on the court. She is the most marketable British athlete since David Beckham because she is the complete package. She's young, she's already winning millions of social media followers, which increases her influence as a brand. She has a multicultural background, and she won her Grand Slam in America, one of the most important consumer markets in the world.
Here at the LTA's headquarters, tennis chiefs insist much more investment is still needed into publicly available park courts and indoor facilities like this one, if Raducanu's success is to translate into a much-needed surge in participation. But there's no doubt the women's game has just had its biggest boost in decades.
And today, the men's champion at Flushing Meadows paid this tribute to Raducanu's achievement.
It's like a Cinderella story. I mean, it's just unbelievable because she didn't have a WTA match win outside of Grand Slams. She only has a win in Wimbledon and US Open. I mean, all this story is just for books, actually.
Raducanu's hit the big time here in the Big Apple, basking in her newfound fame. And if the pitfalls and pressure that can accompany such attention are avoided, there seems no limit to the impact that she can have. Dan Rowan, BBC News.
Time now for a look at all the weather news, and Stav has the details. Hi there, Stav.
Hi there, Clive. Thank you very much. Good evening to you. This week's weather's looking pretty changeable. It's looking pretty wet, in fact, for parts of England and Wales tomorrow. And then a ridge of high pressure will settle things down around the middle parts of the week before we end up with more rain and wind later on in the week as a low pressure sweeps off the Atlantic. So we're looking to the south, to this area of low pressure, and its weather front slowly pushing its way northwards. It's already introduced quite a bit of cloud, some spots of rain across western areas too today. Lovely conditions across northeast Scotland, eastern England. But the rain is pepping up across France then towards the Channel Islands. It'll be spreading its way northeastwards during the night and certainly into tomorrow. So you can see the rain then becoming a little bit more widespread and heavy. It's generally patchy and light further north. A lot of cloud around, some low cloud and mist too, but turning increasingly warm and muggy across southern areas. 13 to 15 degrees by the end of the night here. 10, 11, maybe 12 degrees further north. So a rather cloudy start for many. Further patchy rain across northern areas, but it's eastern Wales, the Midlands, southern and eastern England, which will see the heaviest of the rain. Some thundery downpours mixed into there, rumbles of thunder, in fact, through the morning into the afternoon, becoming confined towards eastern England. Southern and western areas improving a little bit, perhaps a bit of sunshine. If that happens, we could see a few showers breaking out here, but disappointing temperatures where we have the rain. The brightest spots around 20 degrees. That area of low pressure eventually clears away Tuesday night. For Wednesday and for Thursday, we're under the influence of this ridge of high pressure. So although there'll be quite a bit of cloud around, it should be a lot quieter with lighter winds and some sunshine coming through. Probably the day favoured for the best of the sunny spells will be Thursday, as we could see quite a lot of misty, murky conditions on Wednesday. But temperatures will respond, they'll feel pleasantly warm. And then it's all changed then, like I mentioned, by the end of the week, here's a new area of low pressure, a new weather front, sweeping into western areas, some heavy rain eventually pushing towards the east later in the day. Clive.
Steph, thanks for that. That's it. So, goodbye from me, now on BBC One. Let's join our news teams where you are. Have a very good evening.